Number 1. I am no longer available for inconsistency. The avoidant has structured the relationship around their right to be inconsistent, to be present when comfortable and absent when threatened, to offer attention sporadically based on their internal state, rather than on what the relationship requires. This inconsistency has kept you in a state of perpetual uncertainty, never knowing which version of the avoidant you will encounter, constantly adjusting your expectations based on their unpredictable availability. The avoidant's inconsistency has served as control mechanism, keeping you focused on their fluctuating presence rather than on your own consistent needs, training you to be grateful for minimal offerings because you have learned they could easily be withdrawn. When you state clearly that you are no longer available for inconsistency, you eliminate the avoidant's primary tool for maintaining their defended position while keeping you engaged. This statement does not ask the avoidant to change, does not request they become more consistent, does not express hope that they will improve. It simply declares that their inconsistency, regardless of its source or justification, is no longer something you will organize your life around. You are removing yourself from the dynamic where their unpredictable presence determines your emotional state, where their fluctuating availability governs your sense of security, where their inconsistent behavior becomes your constant focus. This boundary communicates that you have evaluated the cost of tolerating inconsistency and determined that cost exceeds any value the relationship provides. You are not threatening to leave if they remain inconsistent. You are stating that you are leaving because they are inconsistent and that this inconsistency is incompatible with what you require from intimate relationship. The distinction is crucial. Threats attempt to control the other person's behavior through fear of consequences. Boundaries simply declare what you will accept and follow through regardless of the other person's response. You are not trying to make the avoidant become consistent. You are removing yourself from relationship with someone who has demonstrated through sustained pattern that consistency is not within their current capacity. The avoidant hears this boundary and initially experiences it as ultimatum, as pressure to change, as yet another person demanding more than they can provide. Yet as they process what you have actually said, they recognize you have not asked them to change anything. You have simply declared that their current patterns, which they have every right to maintain, are patterns you will no longer accommodate. This recognition forces the avoidant to confront that their inconsistency costs something, that their defended right to fluctuate between presence and absence comes with consequence of losing people who require reliability. This statement also eliminates the avoidant's ability to blame you for the relationship's end. When you accommodated their inconsistency while expressing hurt about it, the avoidant could characterize you as demanding, as unable to accept them as they are, as wanting too much. When you calmly state that you are no longer available for inconsistency and follow through by removing yourself, the avoidant cannot credibly claim you wanted too much. You simply wanted basic consistency that healthy relationships require. Your boundary is not excessive demand, but rather minimum standard below which you will not accept treatment. The avoidant faces that they cannot maintain their inconsistent patterns while characterizing your need for consistency as unreasonable. The boundary forces the avoidant into clarity they have successfully avoided. They must either develop genuine consistency, which requires confronting the fear driving their defended fluctuation, or accept that relationships with people who have self-worth will not accommodate their patterns. The avoidant can no longer exist in the comfortable middle ground where they maintain their right to inconsistency while keeping you engaged through occasional presence. You have eliminated that middle ground by declaring it is no longer space you will occupy. The avoidant must choose between their defended inconsistency and access to you, and your boundary communicates that you are genuinely comfortable with either choice they make because you have already chosen yourself. This statement also shifts the power dynamic fundamentally. The avoidant has held power through their inconsistency, keeping you perpetually off balance, focused on winning their consistent presence, working to deserve their reliable attention. Your boundary reclaims your power by declaring that their inconsistency no longer affects you because you will not be present to experience it. The avoidant discovers that inconsistency only provides power over people who remain available to be affected by it. Once you remove yourself, Their fluctuation between presence and absence becomes irrelevant to your well-being. The avoidance pattern continues but loses its audience, its impact, its purpose. The avoidant may test this boundary by attempting their usual pattern of brief return followed by withdrawal, expecting you to respond with your historical relief and renewed investment. When you maintain your boundary, when you refuse to re-engage with someone who has demonstrated they cannot provide consistency, when you remain unavailable despite their temporary presence, the avoidant faces that their pattern no longer works to maintain connection. They recognize that inconsistency that once kept you focused on them now simply keeps you away from them. The consequence is not anger or punishment, but your absence, your focus redirected toward life and people who can provide the reliability you require. Your statement that you are no longer available for inconsistency also models the self-respect the avoidant has never developed. The avoidant watches you choose your peace over continued accommodation of their patterns, observes you prioritizing your well-being over hope that they will change, sees you follow through on boundary without visible anger or pain. This demonstration exposes the avoidant to possibility they have never seriously considered. That self-respect means refusing treatment that contradicts one's worth, regardless of the explanations offered for that treatment. The avoidant witnesses you embodying exactly what they claim to value: autonomy, clear boundaries, self-prioritization, and recognizes that these qualities in you eliminate space for their defended patterns rather than accommodating them. Number 2, your patterns are clear and I'm not confused anymore. The avoidant has relied on creating confusion about their patterns, on maintaining ambiguity about whether their withdrawal reflects personal struggles or relationship problems, on keeping you uncertain about whether you are overreacting to normal need for space or appropriately responding to genuine emotional unavailability. This cultivated confusion has served the avoidant by preventing clear recognition of their patterns, by making you question your perceptions, by ensuring you spend energy trying to figure them out, rather than deciding whether what they offer meets your needs. The avoidant has benefited from your confusion, because confused people continue hoping, continue accommodating, continue giving chances while waiting for clarity that never arrives. When you state that their patterns are clear and you are no longer confused, you eliminate the avoidant's primary defense against accountability. This statement declares that you have observed their behavior across sufficient time to recognize the pattern, that you no longer attribute their withdrawal to temporary circumstances or unique situations, that you understand their defensive structure well enough to predict their responses. You are announcing that you see them clearly, that the fog of confusion they consciously or unconsciously maintained has lifted, that you now recognize their patterns as patterns rather than as isolated incidents requiring individual interpretation. This clarity strips the avoidant of the ability to gaslight you about their behavior. When you expressed confusion, the avoidant could offer alternative interpretations of their actions, could reframe their withdrawal as something other than what it was, could suggest your perceptions were distorted by your own insecurity or neediness. When you declare that their patterns are clear, you communicate that you have moved beyond accepting their reframing, that you trust your own observations more than their explanations, that you understand their defensive structure well enough that their justifications no longer create doubt about what you have witnessed. This statement also removes the emotional charge from your recognition of their patterns. You are not angrily accusing them of having problematic behavior. You are not hurt that they withdraw. You are not desperately trying to make them see what they do. You are simply stating factually that their patterns are clear and that clarity has led you to specific decisions about your availability. This emotional neutrality prevents the avoidant from deflecting by addressing your feelings rather than their patterns. The avoidant cannot claim you are being emotional or irrational when you are speaking with such calm clarity. They cannot suggest you are overreacting when you are simply describing what you have observed without visible distress. The avoidant experiences this statement as more unsettling than emotional accusations because it demonstrates that you have moved through the confusion phase into the acceptance phase. Confusion keeps people engaged, hoping that eventual clarity will reveal the relationship is salvageable. Clarity that leads to acceptance of incompatibility signals the end of hope, the end of attempts to make things work, the end of investment in the relationship's potential. The avoidant recognizes that you are not trying to understand them better in hopes of finding solution. You have understood them adequately, and that understanding has led you to conclude the relationship cannot work given their current capacity. This boundary also forces the avoidant to face that their defensive patterns are visible and predictable, despite their attempts to maintain control through unpredictability. The avoidant's sense of autonomy has included belief that they remain somewhat mysterious, that others cannot fully anticipate or understand them, that their withdrawal maintains element of inscrutability. Your statement that their patterns are clear challenges this belief. You are telling them they are not mysterious, but rather quite transparent, that their defensive structure is recognizable, that their behavior follows predictable logic once one understands avoidant attachment. This recognition that they are less complex than they imagined can be deeply uncomfortable for the avoidant who has invested in seeing themselves as uniquely difficult to understand. Your clarity about their patterns also eliminates the avoidant's ability to use their own confusion as excuse for their behavior. The avoidant often claims they do not understand why they withdraw, that they are working on figuring themselves out, that their patterns are mysterious even to them. This self-claimed confusion generates sympathy and patience from partners who believe the avoidant is genuinely struggling to understand themselves. When you declare that their patterns are clear to you, you implicitly communicate that whatever confusion they claim to experience does not prevent you from seeing what is actually occurring. The avoidant faces that their claimed lack of self-understanding does not obligate you to remain in relationship with them while they supposedly work on developing that understanding. This statement prevents the avoidant from repositioning each instance of withdrawal as unique situation requiring fresh interpretation. The avoidant has benefited from treating each withdrawal as isolated incident with specific circumstances that explain it, preventing pattern recognition that would reveal the consistency of their defensive response. Your declaration that the pattern is clear announces that you will no longer analyze each withdrawal individually, that you recognize all withdrawals as expressions of the same defensive structure regardless of the varying circumstances that trigger them. The avoidant can no longer reset your understanding with each new withdrawal, because you have integrated those withdrawals into clear pattern you now comprehend. The avoidant also loses the ability to suggest that more time will reveal something different about their patterns. When you were confused, the avoidant could imply that continued observation would eventually show that their patterns were not as problematic as they appeared, that understanding would come with patience, that time would clarify that your concerns were overblown. Your statement that their patterns are already clear communicates that you have observed across sufficient time to reach conclusions, that additional time will simply show you more of what you have already seen, that the pattern is established rather than still forming. The avoidant faces that time will not change your clarity, but will only provide additional confirmation of patterns you already understand. Your clarity forces the avoidant to either acknowledge their patterns and take responsibility for them, or deny patterns that you have named with such certainty that denial will appear delusional. If the avoidant acknowledges their patterns, they must face that they have work to do that you are no longer willing to wait for them to complete. If they deny patterns you have clearly identified, they reveal themselves as unable or unwilling to see themselves accurately, which further justifies your decision to disengage. Either response confirms that your clarity-based boundary is appropriate, that you have good reason to remove yourself from relationship with someone whose patterns you understand, but whose patterns are incompatible with your needs. Number 3. I choose myself over hoping you'll change. The avoidant has relied on your hope as invisible tether keeping you invested despite their consistent unavailability. Your hope that they will eventually become more emotionally present, that their defensive patterns will soften with time, that your patience will be rewarded with the intimacy they currently cannot provide, has allowed the avoidant to maintain their defended position without losing you. The avoidant has benefited from your future-focused investment, from your willingness to sacrifice present needs for potential future improvement, from your continued presence based on who they might become rather than who they currently are. Your hope has cost you years of accepting less than you deserve while costing the avoidant nothing, because hope without consequences requires no change. When you state that you choose yourself over hoping they will change, you sever this invisible tether. This statement announces that you have stopped investing in their potential and have started responding only to their demonstrated reality. You are no longer organizing your life around the possibility that they might develop capacities they currently lack. You are choosing your present well-being over the fantasy of who they could become. This shift from hope to acceptance, from future focus to present reality, eliminates the foundation that has allowed the relationship to continue despite its fundamental dysfunction. This boundary communicates that you have recognized hope as the mechanism of your own suffering rather than as path to relationship improvement. You understand now that hoping they would change allowed you to tolerate mistreatment, to sacrifice your needs, to remain in relationship that was harming you. Your hope was not helping them develop. It was helping them avoid consequences that might motivate actual transformation. By choosing yourself over hope, you are acknowledging that your well-being matters more than the comforting fantasy that they will eventually meet your needs if you just remain patient enough. The avoidant experiences this statement as loss of power they did not consciously recognize they possessed. Your hope gave the avoidant tremendous control because it meant they could remain defended while you continued investing in the relationship. They could offer minimal change or temporary improvement, and you would interpret these gestures as signs that your hope was justified, that transformation was beginning, that patience was paying off. Your statement that you no longer hope they will change eliminates this dynamic. The avoidant recognizes that small gestures will no longer buy them more time, that temporary improvement will no longer restore your investment, that your continued presence no longer depends on believing they might eventually become different. This boundary also protects you from the avoidant's most manipulative tactic, promising change to delay your departure. The avoidant has learned that when you threaten to leave, expressing hope for their transformation often convinces you to stay. The avoidant makes vague promises about working on their patterns, about committing to change, about understanding what needs to be different. These promises cost the avoidant nothing because they know your hope will accept promises as equivalent to action, that your desire for them to change will make you interpret their words as evidence of impending transformation. When you declare that you choose yourself over hoping they will change, you immunize yourself against this manipulation. You are announcing that promises no longer interest you, that you respond only to sustained behavioral change, that hope in their potential no longer overrides assessment of their current reality. The statement forces the avoidant to confront that your departure is not about giving up on them, but about choosing yourself. The avoidant may try to characterize your boundary as abandonment, as failure to support them through their struggle, as unwillingness to believe in their capacity for growth. Your framing prevents this characterization. You are not saying they cannot change. You are saying that whether they change or not is no longer your concern, because you are prioritizing your own well-being over continued investment in their potential. This distinction matters because it places responsibility clearly on the avoidant while demonstrating your self-respect. Your choice of yourself over hope also models what the avoidant has never learned: that self-preservation sometimes requires releasing people you care about when they cannot meet your needs. The avoidant watches you make difficult choice to leave despite whatever feelings you have for them, observes you prioritizing your well-being over your attachment, sees you follow through on boundary even though following through means losing the relationship. This demonstration exposes the avoidant to mature love that includes capacity to release what does not serve you, rather than clinging to it through hope that sacrifice will eventually transform it into what you need. The avoidant also faces that your choice eliminates their option to remain in comfortable stasis. When you hoped they would change, the avoidant could remain defended while you waited for transformation that never came. The avoidant experienced no urgency to actually change because your hope meant the relationship continued regardless of their patterns. Your statement that you choose yourself over hope creates urgency the avoidant has never felt. They must either change now or lose you, and your tone communicates that you are genuinely prepared for either outcome because you have already chosen your well-being over the relationship's continuation. This boundary prevents the avoidant from using your hope as evidence that you are the one with the problem. When you continued hoping despite years of evidence that they could not or would not change, the avoidant could suggest you were unable to accept reality, that your expectations were unrealistic, that your disappointment reflected your issues rather than their limitations. When you stop hoping and simply choose yourself, the avoidant loses this deflection. You are demonstrating clear-eyed acceptance of reality by responding to what they have shown you rather than to what you wish they would become. The avoidant cannot characterize you as unrealistic when you are responding to reality by removing yourself from a situation that does not meet your needs. Your choice of yourself also forces the avoidant to recognize the cost of their defended position in concrete rather than abstract terms. When you hoped, the cost of their patterns remained theoretical. You were unhappy, but still present, frustrated, but still invested, hurt, but still trying. When you choose yourself, the cost becomes actual and immediate. The avoidant loses your presence, your care, your investment in them. This concrete loss creates different psychological impact than your continued unhappy presence ever could. The avoidant faces that their defended position costs them people they value, that their patterns create real rather than merely theoretical consequences, that choosing defense over vulnerability means choosing isolation over connection. Number 4, I accept your limitations and they're not compatible with my needs. The avoidant has experienced others' responses to their limitations primarily through 2 modes: attempts to change them through pressure, criticism, or demands, or resentful acceptance that continues the relationship while harboring bitterness about what the avoidant cannot provide. Neither response has forced the avoidant to face genuine consequences of their limitations. Attempts to change them allow the avoidant to position themselves as victims of unreasonable expectations. Resentful acceptance allows the avoidant to maintain their defended position while the other person suffers silently. Both dynamics enable the avoidant to continue their patterns without facing that those patterns make them incompatible with people who have healthy relationship needs. When you state that you accept their limitations and those limitations are not compatible with your needs, you introduce entirely different response that the avoidant has no practiced defense against. This statement contains no attempt to change them, no pressure to become different, no criticism of their capacity. You are simply acknowledging that their limitations exist, that those limitations likely stem from legitimate wounds and defensive adaptations, and that regardless of their source or validity, they create incompatibility with what you require from intimate relationship. This combination of acceptance and incompatibility assessment delivers message the avoidant cannot deflect or reframe. The acceptance component prevents the avoidant from positioning themselves as victim of your unrealistic expectations. You are not demanding they change. You are not suggesting their limitations are character flaws. You are not pressuring them to become someone they are not. You are accepting them exactly as they are, acknowledging their current capacity as legitimate expression of their attachment wounds and defensive structure. The avoidant cannot claim you want too much when you are clearly accepting their limitations as real and likely unchangeable. Your acceptance removes the avoidant's primary defense, characterizing others' needs as excessive demands that the avoidant is right to resist. The incompatibility component forces the avoidant to face consequences of their limitations without giving them anyone to blame. You are not leaving because they are wrong or bad. You are leaving because who they are and what you need do not align. This framing prevents the avoidant from externalizing responsibility for the relationship's end. They cannot blame you for being too demanding when you have accepted their limitations. They cannot blame circumstances when the incompatibility stems directly from their patterns. They must face that their defensive structure, while understandable and perhaps necessary for their psychological survival, creates natural consequences that include losing relationships with people who require more emotional availability than they can provide. This statement also demonstrates emotional maturity that contrasts sharply with the avoidant's defended position. You are showing capacity to hold complexity. Accepting someone's limitations as valid while simultaneously recognizing those limitations make the person incompatible with your needs. This mature perspective refuses the false choice between accepting someone exactly as they are forever or trying to change them. You demonstrate third option the avoidant has never considered, accepting someone's current limitations while also accepting that those limitations mean the relationship cannot work. This modeling exposes the avoidant to psychological sophistication. Their defended position has prevented them from developing. The avoidant experiences this boundary as more destabilizing than criticism or pressure because it offers them nothing to defend against. When others criticize their limitations, the avoidant could defend themselves by explaining their wounds, justifying their defensive necessity, arguing that others should be more understanding. When others pressured them to change, the avoidant could resist by asserting their right to be who they are, by claiming others wanted to control them. Your statement that you accept their limitations while finding those limitations incompatible with your needs eliminates defensive positioning. You are not attacking them, so they need not defend. You are not trying to change them, so they need not resist. You are simply making assessment and acting on it in ways that demonstrate self-respect. This framing also prevents the avoidant from hoping that you will eventually lower your standards enough to accommodate their limitations. When others stayed while resenting the avoidant's limitations, the avoidant could hope that those people would eventually adjust their expectations, would learn to accept less, would decide that what the avoidant could offer was enough. Your clear statement that their limitations are incompatible with your needs eliminates this hope. You are not saying their limitations bother you, but you will try to accept them. You are saying their limitations create fundamental incompatibility that you will not try to overcome by adjusting your standards. The avoidant faces that you will not make yourself smaller to fit what they can provide. Your statement forces the avoidant to recognize that acceptance of limitations does not require accommodation of those limitations. The avoidant has often conflated these concepts, suggesting that if someone truly accepted them, that person would stay regardless of what the avoidant could or could not provide. Your boundary exposes the fallacy of this conflation. You can accept that their limitations are real, understandable, and likely rooted in legitimate trauma, while simultaneously accepting that relationship with someone who has those limitations does not meet your needs. Acceptance and accommodation are separate choices, and you are demonstrating that accepting someone's reality does not obligate remaining in relationship with that person. The avoidant also confronts that their limitations, while perhaps not their fault in terms of origin, remain their responsibility in terms of consequences. You are not blaming them for having limitations created by early wounds or attachment disruptions. You are simply responding to those limitations by removing yourself from situations where those limitations harm you. The avoidant faces that understanding the source of their patterns does not eliminate the impact of those patterns, that having legitimate reasons for emotional unavailability does not make that unavailability acceptable to others, that their wounds explain their limitations but do not obligate anyone to remain in relationship with someone whose limitations prevent genuine intimacy. This boundary communicates that you understand them more clearly than they realized, that your decision to leave comes from informed assessment rather than from misunderstanding or impatience. The avoidant cannot tell themselves you did not really see them, did not really understand their struggles, did not give them adequate chance. You are demonstrating that you saw them clearly, understood their limitations deeply, gave them extensive opportunity to show they could meet your needs, and concluded based on that comprehensive understanding that they cannot provide what relationship with you requires. Your acceptance-based boundary eliminates the avoidance ability to maintain that you left because you could not handle their complexity, when you are clearly handling their complexity by making mature decision to prioritize your well-being.